podcasts. Pope Leo XIV just called for artificial intelligence to be, quote, disarmed, unquote. And he's not the only one seeing biblical warnings in our AI revolution. Today, we're exploring how ancient scriptures are being interpreted as prophecies about artificial intelligence, what religious leaders are saying about AI's dangers, and why biblical scholars think we're living through end times technology. By the end of this episode, you'll understand the spiritual and ethical frameworks being used to evaluate AI's risks and what these warnings mean for our technological future. Let me bring in someone who's been tracking these fascinating intersections.
So here's what's really striking about this moment. We're seeing religious leaders and biblical scholars identify patterns in scripture that seem to directly address our current AI boom. Pope Leo XIV's encyclical isn't just theological speculation. It's a 42,000-word document that specifically warns about AI warfare, economic displacement, and what he calls the risk of AI becoming a tool of, quote, domination, exclusion, and death, unquote.
Wait, 42,000 words? That's like a short book dedicated to AI warnings. What specifically is he seeing that's so concerning?
Well, according to Christopher Hale, who covers the Vatican, Pope Leo XIV considers AI to be, quote, the biggest challenge facing humanity today, unquote. And he's not just theorizing, he's the first pope to own a cell phone and Apple Watch. So he's experiencing this technological revolution firsthand. His biggest fear? That we're moving toward autonomous weapon systems where human actors are no longer making life and death decisions.
That's fascinating that he's so tech-savvy himself. But let's step back. How are biblical scholars actually finding AI warnings in ancient texts?
Great question. So, while the Bible obviously doesn't mention artificial intelligence directly, scholars are identifying several key themes. First, there's Genesis 1:26-27, which teaches that humans are made in God's image with unique capacities for reason and relationship. The concern is that AI simulates these human-like abilities, potentially leading people to, as one source puts it, quote, cede the image of God to machines rather than to God himself, unquote.
So it's about human dignity and what makes us uniquely human.
Exactly. And then there's the pride factor. Scripture repeatedly warns against trusting in human inventions over God. Some scholars point to Genesis 3:4-5, where the serpent's deception shows how false promises can lead to spiritual harm. They're seeing AI as a similar temptation, placing confidence in technology rather than divine wisdom.
Interesting. But some of these interpretations get pretty specific about end times prophecy, right?
Oh, absolutely. This is where it gets really fascinating. Some prophetic interpretations are linking AI to Revelation 13, where a statue is given life and commands people to receive a mark or face death. Modern interpreters are reading this statue as potentially being a robot or AI system.
Wait, they're interpreting biblical statues as robots?
Yeah, and they're connecting it to what they call a, quote, technology explosion, unquote, in the last days. According to these interpretations, this parallels the time of the Nephilim in Genesis 6, described as a period of extreme wickedness and corruption. The warning is that rapid technological advancement will be accompanied by moral decay and spiritual danger.
So they're seeing AI development as a sign of moral decline?
Well, it's more nuanced than that. The biblical perspective seems to be that AI itself isn't inherently evil, but its misuse, especially when it fosters pride, replaces human responsibility, or is used for oppression, can be spiritually dangerous. It's about how we approach and deploy the technology.
That makes sense. And Pope Leo XIV is making some pretty specific policy recommendations, isn't he?
Absolutely. He's calling for what he terms, quote, robust legal frameworks, independent oversight, informed users, and a political system that does not abdicate its responsibility, unquote. He specifically wrote that, quote, a more moral AI is not enough if that morality is determined by a few, unquote.
So he's worried about concentration of power?
Exactly. And here's what's really interesting. Despite his critiques, he invited Anthropic co-founder Christopher Olah to speak at the Vatican. Olah raised a crucial point, quote, AI development is concentrated in a handful of wealthy nations. How will we ensure that the gains of AI are shared globally? We do not have a mechanism for this, unquote.
Why invite someone from an AI company if you're warning against AI?
According to Christopher Hale's reporting, the church, quote, cannot be Luddite, unquote. Pope Leo XIV says AI is inevitable, so they need to find good actors to work with. Apparently, Anthropic has been more willing to engage on ethics than its competitors. The Vatican has actually been reaching out to AI companies for a decade.
That's a pragmatic approach, but the war concerns seem particularly urgent for him.
Oh, absolutely. Pope Leo XIV talked about AI warfare as a sin and a betrayal of just war doctrine. He's, quote, aghast by war, unquote, in general, but he finds the idea of war waged by machines against humans to be even more of an atrocity than war waged by humans.
Just war doctrine, that's the Catholic teaching about when war can be morally justified?
Right, it's a 6 centuries old tradition from St. Thomas Aquinas and St. Augustine. But as Hale points out, it, quote, didn't really imagine a world where human actors were not being the ones to make decisions, unquote. So Pope Leo XIV wants Catholic social justice theory to address autonomous weapons head-on.
And he's making some pretty bold comparisons to historical events, right?
Yes. Pope Leo XIV compared AI risks to the Tower of Babel, that biblical story about humans trying to build a tower to reach heaven, which God saw as dangerous pride and hubris. It's this idea that unchecked technological ambition can lead to spiritual and social catastrophe.
The Tower of Babel comparison is really striking. It suggests this isn't just about technology, but about human nature itself.
Exactly. And what's fascinating is how these ancient warnings seem to anticipate modern concerns. Biblical principles call for stewardship, accountability, and transparency in innovation. AI applications in areas like privacy, bias, and control mirror the ethical failures that Scripture warns against.
So these aren't just abstract theological concerns, they're practical ethical frameworks?
Absolutely. The Bible urges that all human inventions be used to glorify God and serve his purposes, not to exalt human pride or exploit others. Pope Leo XIV is essentially saying we need moral guardrails, not just technological innovation.
And he's not just talking to religious audiences, is he?
No, according to Hale's analysis, Pope Leo XIV was speaking to 3 main audiences: governments in Washington and around the world, Silicon Valley itself, and consumers. He wants us on our phones less, more face-to-face encounters, families having dinner without phones.
So it's not just about AI development, but about how we're already living with technology?
Exactly. And here's something really interesting. He's also concerned about economic displacement. He wrote that, quote, the pursuit of greater profits cannot justify choices that systematically sacrifice jobs, unquote. He's calling for regulation to protect workers, much like Pope Leo XIII did during the Industrial Revolution.
So there's historical precedent for papal warnings about technological disruption?
Yes. Pope Leo XIV signed his encyclical on May 15th, exactly 135 years after Pope Leo XIII signed his transformational document on workers' rights during the Industrial Revolution. Leo XIII was concerned about what industrialization would do to workers. It gave birth to the labor movement and unions.
That's an incredible parallel. So we're seeing history repeat itself in some ways?
In many ways, yes. Pope Leo XIV is looking for some kind of social movement to safeguard against what he calls, quote, the atrocities that might come from economic dislocation due to AI, unquote. He's essentially saying we need to learn from the Industrial Revolution's mistakes.
Now, some of these prophetic interpretations get pretty specific about signs of the end times. What exactly are they pointing to?
Well, some prophetic readings suggest that AI will be a visible sign of the last days, alongside false prophets and global corruption. The warning is that believers should remain spiritually alert, avoid idolizing technology, and keep their focus on God's truth and righteousness.
So it's about maintaining spiritual priorities in a technological age?
Right. And what's really interesting is that these warnings aren't anti-technology per se. The practical takeaway from a biblical perspective is that AI requires humility, ethical use, and constant reliance on divine guidance. It's about stewardship, not rejection.
That's a more nuanced position than I expected. But Pope Leo XIV seems genuinely concerned about immediate risks, not just spiritual ones.
Absolutely. He's particularly worried about children and families. Christopher Hale describes him as, quote, the Pope of our children, unquote. He wants robust regulation now, not abstract ethical discussions. He wrote that, quote, it's not enough to invoke ethics in the abstract, unquote.
And he's getting pushback from some political leaders, right?
Yes, there was back and forth when Vice President J.D. Vance criticized the Pope for weighing in on war. Vance famously went to Europe in February 2025 saying, we need to stop talking about guardrails and disruption and talk more about innovation. Pope Leo XIV is saying the opposite. We absolutely need to talk about guardrails.
So there's a real tension between innovation and regulation?
Exactly. And what makes Pope Leo XIV's position unique is that he's experiencing this technological revolution personally. He's the first pope to own a cell phone, to send an email. So when he writes about AI risks, he's not writing about something he read about, he's writing about something he's experienced.
That personal experience probably makes his warnings more credible to tech-savvy audiences.
Definitely. And it's worth noting that his encyclical is getting mixed reception from the tech world. Some leaders are taking his warnings seriously, while others see it as overreach. But the fact that he invited Christopher Olah shows he's trying to engage constructively, not just condemn.
What about the broader biblical scholarship community? Are they all interpreting these texts the same way?
Not at all. There's significant debate about how literally to interpret these prophetic connections. Some scholars see clear parallels between biblical warnings and AI risks, while others view these interpretations as reading modern concerns into ancient texts. But there's growing consensus that biblical principles about human dignity and ethical stewardship are relevant.
So even if people disagree about prophecy, they're finding common ground on ethics?
Exactly. Whether you believe AI is fulfilling biblical prophecy or not, the ethical frameworks are compelling. The emphasis on human dignity, the warnings against pride and over-reliance on technology, the call for accountability and transparency, these resonate across religious and secular audiences.
And these aren't just Christian concerns, right? Other religious traditions are grappling with similar questions?
Absolutely. While we're focusing on biblical warnings, similar concerns about technology, human dignity, and ethical responsibility appear across religious traditions. The specific prophetic interpretations might be uniquely Christian, but the underlying ethical questions are universal.
So when you step back from all this, what's the bigger picture? Are these warnings actually useful for how we approach AI development?
I think they are, regardless of your religious beliefs. These warnings force us to ask fundamental questions. What does it mean to be human? How do we maintain human agency and dignity? Who controls these powerful technologies? How do we ensure they serve humanity rather than replace it?
Those are exactly the questions we should be asking. And whether you see biblical prophecy or just timeless wisdom, these frameworks offer something concrete.
Right. Pope Leo XIV's call to, quote, disarm, unquote, AI isn't about stopping technological progress. It's about ensuring that progress serves human flourishing. The biblical warnings remind us that every technological advance is also a moral choice about what kind of future we're building.
And that brings us back to that Tower of Babel comparison. The warning isn't about reaching too high, but about forgetting our place in the larger order of things.
Exactly. Whether you frame it in religious terms or not, there's wisdom in approaching AI with humility rather than hubris. These ancient warnings about pride, power, and human dignity feel remarkably relevant to our current moment.
Well, that brings us to the end of today's episode of Copilot Podcasts. Next time you hear about AI breakthroughs or warnings, remember that some of our oldest texts might contain our newest wisdom. Whether you see prophecy or just pattern recognition, the call for humility, ethics, and human dignity in our technological choices has never been more urgent.